Check out today's piece of OtakuDaiKun fan art. It's a sketch of both dais, which I find compelling because they've been given ahoges. I wonder if I should add those to my actual design. Anyway, I love this, because it reminds me of something you'd see from Studio Trigger. Thank you so much, Neronico1. Welcome back to OtakuDaiKun. Dai here. Turns out, the story of King Arthur is complicated, whether you're talking about actual mythology or Fate's version of events. Nasu's clearly had Artoria's backstory in his head since the original Fate Stay Night, but we've only been given glimpses of that timeline scattered throughout Type Moon's works. Fate Zero taught us about Lancelot's shame, as well as Artoria's troubled kingship. Apocrypha gave us a better look at Mordred's rebellion, and the most recent Lost Belt for Fate Grand Order really fleshes out details about Morgan Le Fay. It's deviated so much from the original legend that famous anecdotes such as Uther Pendragon tricking Arthur's mother into courtship are no longer accurate. Thanks to this, I'm stuck updating my lore on Artoria whenever new pieces of information become available. One of the works Nasu's given is Garden of Avalon, a novel originally released alongside the Unlimited Blade Works anime. Until recently, English-speaking fans have only had access to Garden of Avalon through its sound drama, Glorious After Image, which was released in 2016. You can find a translation of this audio CD on YouTube, and that's what I used when making my most recent lore of Artoria. From what I can tell, though, the novel contains much more information than the sound drama, making it hard to tell the full story without it. However, thanks to translators Yusuke and Manolo, we finally have the Garden of Avalon novel to enjoy in English. To celebrate this occasion, I'd like to take this opportunity to go over the text and compile everything it teaches us about our beloved King of Knights. Ideally, you should listen to both the drama and read the novel for yourself, as they're really beautiful. I also did a whole live stream recording this novel, but here we'll be doing a lore-based analysis of the content as well. Since there's so much material to cover, I'll be breaking this lore down into 3 separate videos. The novel is composed of 7 chapters, labeled 0 through 6. Today's video will guide us through the first 2. Chapter 0, In the Flower Garden, sets the stage with Merlin wandering the land of Avalon, the king's utopia after death. Located in the reverse side of the world, Avalon consists of vast plains of lush greenery and vibrant blossoms. In addition to being Artoria's destined place of rest, it is filled with other life, specifically what remains of fairies after they departed for the reverse side of the world. We first got to see Avalon during the last episode sequence of Rialtanua, in which Shiro and Artoria reunite in the afterlife. There, it was mostly a huge field of grass, surrounded by a wooded forest. Since then, we've seen Avalon depicted in this novel, the Camelot films, as well as Lost Belt 6, where Chaldea actually gets to visit the place and interact with its resident fae. These later depictions are much more colorful, filled with the sorts of flowers that Merlin conjures in his noble phantasm, and we'll see why here. While it's not said in such blunt terms, Merlin is in Avalon because he's a playboy. More specifically, he's fleeing from Vivian, the Lady of the Lake. For a time, he was her lover and even taught her magecraft, but after scorning her, he's on the run. Despite its beauty, Avalon is a dangerous place to ordinary humans. Its mana is so dense it would cause most people to explode. Thankfully, Merlin is both a mage and an incubus, so he's able to withstand it. Technically, he's only half incubus, since one of his parents was human. Merlin's timing sucks, because he fled just as Camelot was being usurped by Mordred. He has clairvoyance, and even though he's fully aware of Artoria's downfall, he does nothing to stop it. Now, it seems semantic, but Merlin's clairvoyance isn't necessarily an ability to see the future. Rather, he is always able to see the entire world of the present, and from that expansive knowledge, he's able to calculate what will happen over time. It's very similar to Shizune Seo in Kata no Kyokai, actually. In her case, she had an amazing attention to detail. Without even being conscious of it, Shizune's mind would be memorizing all sorts of stimuli, and she'd occasionally calculate a prediction of the future based on that data. For instance, by memorizing the traffic patterns all around you, you might predict that a pedestrian will step into the path of a speeding car and die. For Merlin, it's basically that, but on a global scale. As Merlin walks deeper into Avalon, he reaches a point where the flowers stop growing. This new region of Avalon more closely resembles the barren Camelot he left behind. Continuing to walk, flowers blossom wherever he steps. Merlin is considered one of the greatest mages of all time, but even though he has his clairvoyance, he feels his only talent is sowing the seeds of life, hence why he is the Mage of Flowers. Plus, clairvoyance isn't as awesome as it sounds. For Merlin, it causes him to see people and their fates as a kind of painting to observe. By having such a unique perspective, he feels alienated from human society. In that regard, he has little self-worth and often considers taking his own life, anticipating that his own predecessors would mock him within the throne of heroes. The only thing keeping him from doing so is his obligation to watch over Artoria till the end. Merlin is fascinated by humans, not just as a source of nourishing dreams, but also for their struggle to survive. Even though he knows mankind will one day die out, leading to an age of will, where life exists beyond the flesh, he continues to be invested in the outcome of humanity, raising kings to create a better future. Despite this, he does not understand humans, nor does he genuinely care for them. He irrationally sees the age of man as beautiful, and for that reason alone, he aims for a happy end for humanity. This means that even though he looks friendly and inviting, his true character is far less emotive. Perhaps a better way of putting it is that even though he's on humanity's side, he only does so for his own benefit and satisfaction. Eventually, Merlin comes across a stone gate that reads, "Only the sinless may pass." He realizes that, in his attempt to evade Vivian, he's actually played right into her hands. Even so, he steps through the gate, fascinated by the term sinless. As someone who disregards the notions of good and evil, he found the invitation directed exclusively at him. Thus, with a spell called the Garden, Vivian seals Merlin in a tall tower in Avalon for the rest of eternity, so he takes this chance to reminisce on the life that brought him here. He's not alone either. This is after Merlin had already tamed the beast of humanity, Cath Palug, so for the moment, he has some company. Chapter 1, The Morning of Selection, takes us back to Artoria's youth. After being born, she was put in the care of a knight, Sir Ector, and trained alongside Ector's son, Sir Kay, for 15 years. She stayed up late the previous night watching over a newborn foal in the stables. Carelessly, she fell asleep without a blanket, but Kay must have draped one over her come morning. Now that she's awake, she hurries to prepare food for the horses. She brags to Ector's horse, Eto, about how she was able to push Ector back during a match. It was only a single step, but in an actual fight, it could have led to victory. Every day, she goes through the same routine, eating a humble bit of bread to hold her over through sword training. Only after sparring does she eat an actual breakfast. Ector is not a famous knight. He retired without any glorious tales, yet Artoria acknowledges him as the strongest knight she knows. She loves it when she's able to draw out even a fraction of his true talents. However, lately, he appears troubled, but he refuses to admit why. Rather than looking upon her as his student, pointing out her mistakes, he stares back sorrowfully as they practice. Unable to help, Artoria simply blames it on Sir Kay being foul-mouthed. Of course, she has her speculations. Ector is a man who enjoys the company of others, which suggests he chose to live far from the city for her sake. Her mentor has sacrificed so much to raise her. As guilty as this makes her, she refuses to show it, instead expressing gratitude to honor him. In fact, she loves Ector like a father, but is forbidden from referring to him as such. After parting with the horses, Artoria greets Ector in the garden. She apologizes for sleeping in, scarfs down her bread, and starts their training. In truth, Ector's sorrow comes from knowing this is their last day to spar like this. Over lunch, he asks Artoria to do him a favor. Sir Kay went to town to take part in the fair, but forgot his lance, so Artoria is tasked with delivering it. Apparently, the art of jousting has declined over the years, leaving Ector's estate only one lance for Kay. While Artoria is allowed to spar with a fake sword, Merlin for some reason doesn't want her using a fake lance, so she never got the chance to joust for herself. For her final task of the day, she sets out to town on horseback. Even though it's harvest season, she remarks how lonely it is along the trail. Conditions have been getting worse for everyone. Their nearby forest, for instance, used to be an abundant source of food for hunters. Lately, however, foreign tribes have taken to the forest for themselves, making it dangerous to explore. During the 4th century, much of Britain was occupied by the Roman Empire. This granted the land and its people some protection and stability, but by the 5th century, Roman occupation declined. Eventually, Roman soldiers left Britain entirely, declaring that territory lost. As a result, the political and military climate in Britain turned chaotic, resulting in a feudal nation occupied by different tribes and kings fighting one another for dominance. This left Britain vulnerable to invasion from groups like the Saxons. Strife remained at an all-time high until the war to the north against the Picts, which caused Britain's kings to cooperate. That is, all except for one of these kings, Vortigern, who breaks his agreement in an attempt to unify Britain. As the incarnation of the White Dragon, he sides with the Saxons to bring about chaos. Now, let's take a break and talk about these dragons. In our actual mythology, the Red Dragon, or Welsh Dragon, is a symbol of Roman-British nationalism and was said to be associated with King Arthur in battle. An opposing White Dragon is also described, representing the Saxon invaders. The Welsh myth Mabinogion tells the story of both of these dragons fighting each other. To subdue them, a pit was dug in the center of Britain and filled with mead. Attracted to the mead, both dragons drank and fell asleep. In another work, the Historia Britannium, Vortigern builds a castle where these dragons sleep, waking them up to fight once more. The Red Dragon ultimately defeats the White one, symbolizing how the Britons prevailed against the Saxons. Later stories straight up interpret the Red Dragon as a prophecy of Arthur's coming. In the Nasu-verse, dragons are the ultimate phantasmal species, with extremely potent magical cores that render them immune to most forms of magecraft. With the dragon's blood, otherwise ordinary humans can inherit that magical resistance, among other empowering traits. When the Age of Gods came to an end, dragons pieced out to the reverse side like the world's other phantasmal beings, except for one. The Dragon of Albion remains the last pure-blooded dragon in the world. It refused to leave when all the other dragons left, and as such, missed its opportunity to travel to the reverse side. Eventually, Albion decided the Age of Man was too empowering, and tried to force its way to the reverse side by digging deep into the ground. The idea was that the depths of the earth contained stronger traces of mystery, but sadly, Albion died midway. Its corpse remains in the earth, and has become the spiritual tomb Albion upon which the clock tower is built. In truth, what fate calls the Red and White Dragons are actually just two opposing incarnations of Albion. Thus, Vortigern became the White Dragon after his tribe drank Albion's blood. Under the guise of unifying Britain, he invited foreign tribes to invade and sow chaos. Ultimately, Vortigern yearned to destroy Britain and establish his rule atop that ruined foundation. That's why Artoria's father, Uther, tried to fight back. Of course, thanks to Merlin's prophecies, however, he knew he couldn't win. Instead, he needed a different incarnation of Albion to oppose the White Dragon, so Merlin had Lady Igraine impregnated with the essence of the Red Dragon to birth Artoria. In other words, the Nasu-verse contextualizes the Red and White Dragons as part of Merlin's prophecy. He described a Red Dragon rising to defeat the White Dragon, when in reality, both entities derive from a single dragon, Albion. We'll get more into this later, but for now, I wanted to clarify all this dragon stuff since it's confused me for the longest time. Thanks to all of this, Vortigern and the Saxons destroyed the fortress city of Londinium. Even Uther, who was considered the greatest of Britain's kings, was outmatched. Confident that his heir would save Britain in his place, Uther fought to the bitter end. His loss ushered in the Dark Age of Britain, with the Saxons occupying British land. War between these forces was common, rendering the land infertile for crops. To give the people hope after Uther's demise, Merlin made his prophecy of a new king, an incarnation of the Red Dragon who would gather the Knights of the Round Table and vanquish the White Dragon. At this point, Lil Artoria was only 5 years old, but the prophecy helped quell the people's fears for an entire decade. Vortigern, of course, tried to find Uther's heir during this time, but never could because she was raised in secret by Ector. The town Artoria visits is quaint in comparison to Londinium. As she approaches, she notices the people are more excited than usual because Merlin has come to choose the king's successor. Naturally, Artoria knew she was being raised as the next king. She presented herself as a man named Artorius and was trained like any other man would. After all, in her time, women could neither be kings nor knights. Till now, her slender 15-year-old body was androgynous enough for her to pass as a male. She was even found attractive to the village's young women. To the knights of the town, Artoria was considered a mere squire, but for this moment alone, they told her she counted as a candidate for kingship. Kay forgetting his lance was only an excuse to send Artoria here. Merlin's trial isn't one of combat. Rather, he who pulls a holy sword from its stone shall be crowned king. This blade, Caliburn, is a sword of selection that cannot be drawn through brute force alone. Kay, along with knights from all over the country, try and fail to pull the sword. While it was Merlin who set up this trial, he is nowhere to be found as the knights struggle. Soon, the citizens began to look discouraged, and to raise their morale, the knights boisterously claimed they could decide their king through jousting. Artoria takes this chance to return Kay's lance and ask about their new contest. Pessimistically, Kay admits the knights weren't all that keen on having a prophet king to begin with. They're better off fending for their own self-interests and accepting their own blame. It's a more human way to live. It's actually a bit of a relief for the knights, because none of them wanted the responsibility of living up to Merlin's expectations. Kay takes his lance and tells Artoria to go home, else the other knights make fun of her. While he and the others build their arena in the farmlands, she alone stands by the sword and contemplates the people's viewpoint. Just how many people even believed in Merlin's prophecy? The very point of the contest was a facade, as only she was being raised from birth to become the prophesized king. She studied the sword, learned to govern the country, and suppressed her own feelings. It wasn't even her choice. She doesn't know what her parents look like, and she can't empathize with Uther's ambitions. Emotionless, she simply complied with Merlin's teachings. Her only personal motivation was the peaceful life of her foster family and the vitality of the townsfolk. She was never permitted the chance to live life like a normal human. Instead, whatever fantasies she had of being an ordinary girl in the town were put to rest in the depths of her heart. Having denied herself that happiness for 15 years now, she is compelled to be king not out of a sense of duty, but because abandoning her role now would render those 15 years of sacrifice meaningless. Simply grasping Caliburn by the hilt makes Artoria feel lighter. With the simplest tug, she can easily claim the blade for herself. Yet, the moment she prepares to, Merlin finally shows up. He gives her a brand new prophecy that if she does pull the sword, she will cease to be human. People will eventually scorn her, and she will die tragically. It's not just words either. He fills her mind with images of the tragedies to come. Merlin wonders to himself why he's even doing this. He wants her to become the king, so why bother scaring her with the future? Perhaps he wants to give Artoria a fair choice, and resolves to accept whatever she goes with. Merlin attempts to leave her be for the moment, but she quickly gathers her resolve and quells her worries. Rather than fearing her own death, she considers that there might be a more worthy king than her, someone who deserves the throne in her place. With no such person existing, however, she accepts the burden herself. Based on what she's been taught, Artoria knows that pulling the sword will effectively mean killing her former self. She used to tremble at night from the realization that being a king meant killing countless people of one group to protect her own. Pulling Caliburn means that she can no longer have such reasonable fears. That said, the visions Merlin showed her also contained people's smiles, and that becomes her motive for finally drawing the sword of selection. Seeing this, Merlin gets a wicked sense of pleasure. Knowing full well how much Artoria will suffer during her campaign, he also knows that it will be beautiful. He sees her suffering as a conduit for his own satisfaction. The chapter suddenly shifts to a section titled Tales of the Knights. Here, we have Sir Kay reflecting on what just transpired. He was first introduced to Artoria when she was 5 years old. He reasons she'll grow up to be a sexy lady, yet is told to treat her like a little brother. Kay imagines what it must have looked like when Uther was planning Artoria's conception. The king knew his successor would have to be a step above mortal men, a hybrid of human and dragon. This suggests that it was all Uther's idea, and he merely asked Merlin to help out with it. To that, Kay is certain that Merlin was ecstatic. Kay mocks the entire ordeal, as Uther and Igraine made love, but were not in love. It was an arrangement made without romance, because Igraine happened to be the noblewoman most compatible with the procedure. Mages call it conceptual fertilization. In Artoria's case, her otherwise human body was mixed with the idea of the red dragon. The resulting mana in her wound up being far superior to that of a human's. In that regard, she was more like a god, at least it felt that way to knights like Agravain. Despite this, Kay can't help but find it odd how normal Artoria was while growing up. Sure, she trained with the sword, but when going to town, she blended in like a natural. Regardless of her being trained to be as inhuman as possible, her humanity slipped through all the same. She was always a sore loser, not because she'd be angry at her opponent, but rather at herself for being so pitiful. Even so, she always pulled herself back up and kept at it. The other knights saw this as her having a heart of iron, but only Kay and Ector knew she was far more delicate. She wasn't immune to being hurt or discouraged, she just never let it break her. Turns out, Kay is a lot smarter than he lets on. When it came time to select Britain's king, he knew it was a test meant only for Artoria. I can only assume this means that his words to her that day were meant to give her an out, another alternative so she could make her own choice in the matter after having everything forced on her. For a time after drawing the sword, Artoria traveled alongside Sir Kay and Merlin, but Kay refuses to bring up what happened back then. It isn't until after Artoria masters Caliburn that she actually debuts as Britain's king. To avoid Vortigern's suspicion, she starts small, rescuing a single tribe, establishing a base, and gathering knights for the Round Table. In order to battle the Saxons, Artoria brings back the method of using cataphracts, a type of heavily armored unit made for charging infantry. This gives her growing army the might needed to break through Saxon barricades on horseback. Kay admits this is brutal, considering how Artoria used to love tending to her horses. After all, horses don't comprehend human warfare, and it's sad to have them die for a battle they can't even question. Regardless, one of these successful battles puts King Arthur on the map. While most of Britain sees her as their long-awaited king, Kay is able to see her more human side. At some point in their journey, Artoria's sister Morgan tricks her into losing Caliburn. From this time until she later gets Excalibur, she desperately tries to hide her mistake, pale as a ghost for no longer possessing the very sword that made her king. Kay, finding this hilarious, responds by carving a wooden sculpture of a bird catching salmon. This harkens back to an anecdote Artoria gives in Hollow Ataraxia. Back when they were still training, Artoria got sick, and Kay had to care for her. Rather than nursing her, he offered Artoria a reward for getting well quickly. After some persistence, he finally got her to admit she wanted to dream of a lion running across the plains. Hoping to inspire such a dream, he carved a wooden lion for her. What was supposed to be an old, dying lion that couldn't possibly harm her in her dreams wound up looking more like the hybrid of a dog and cat. Nonetheless, Artoria was able to have the dream she wanted. It was a sweet moment made funny by Kay's poor carving skills. Apparently, Kay used to know Morgan Le Fay before she became so antagonistic. She went from being pure as a fairy to a splendid warrior maiden, and later a cruel witch. Being Uther's proper daughter, she holds resentment toward King Arthur. The sentiment is shared by Vortigern, who responds to Arthur's emergence by preparing for a decisive battle. Alongside her loyal knight, Sir Gawain, Artoria stormed the citadel of Vortigern's stronghold, slaying the vile king and allowing her reign to finally begin in earnest. With the fortress reclaimed, she had Camelot constructed in its place. Over the next 10 years, Artoria mediates between the various other lords in Britain while putting an end to their feud with the Saxons. Kay notes that when not tending to their duties at the Round Table, he and Merlin often mess around with women. It's worth noting that Kay's perspective takes place while Artoria is off in Rome and Mordred is busy turning the kingdom against her. Pessimistically speaking on behalf of the other knights, he asserts that most of her followers were insincere. None of them voiced their complaints directly, but they also never truly acknowledged her as their king. Rather, she appeared to them as a child, a freak of nature who hasn't aged since she drew Caliburn. While they served her, they scorned her in secret, waiting to take advantage of a power struggle. As such, she was only accepted when her reign was going well, allowing her people to ignore anything that unsettled them. Thus, Artoria remained their ideal king until the moment her reign showed cracks. The people then turned on her, blaming her for not saving them. As Kay writes these thoughts out, these same followers are faithlessly joining Mordred's army. Seeing this as the end of the line, Kay is writing to Merlin about what to do now. He considers taking his fortune and sailing to another land, just as Merlin is planning to flee to Avalon. He feels like crap, recalling how Artoria never got the chance to live like the people she wanted to protect. When she was still training under Hector, she spent her free time tending to the horses and patrolling their village. This cut into her sleep, to the point where she would only rest from dawn till sunrise. Unable to help in any way, Kay watched her sacrifice any semblance of her own freedom. To make matters worse, when Kay met Merlin, he realized that Artoria was being trained as a king even in those few hours of sleep each night. Her efforts were tireless in the most literal sense. As the only one who knows just how much she's given up, Kay ends this chapter by expressing his pity. That's all I plan to cover in this video. I hope you guys look forward to part 2 very soon. Thanks for watching!
If you enjoy this channel, help us grow by liking, commenting, sharing the video, subscribing to OtakuDaiKun, and
most of all, smashing that notification bell so you don't miss out on all of our anime discussion, lore, or Let's Play content.
You can support us directly through Patreon, Subscribestar, or our YouTube membership, all of which come with benefits like exclusive vids and early access.
As always,
celebrate your fandom!
I want to give a special shout out to all my $10 and up supporters: VideoGamer75, Stephen Elak, Samuel Gersten, Otaku Mom, Jens Bauman, Mystic Samurai 1983, Lord Omagoden, Free Brick, RNGer Shuffles 1498, Alexis Yukio Gomez Yamato, Johnny Tsunami, Link Pendrago, Brandon Baker, Observer Bellis, Flash Daniel, Caitlin P, Vladimirovna, Normace, Jonathan Padua, The Taz 96, and SF Giants fan Mike. Thank you all so much.